this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements. Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time, 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
How do you make chicken nuggets like 7,000% better? Short answer, you let Taco Bell make them. Long answer, start with all white meat chicken nuggets, bread them in crunchy tortilla chips, and serve them with Hidden Valley Diablo Ranch. Yep, that's Hidden Valley Ranch mixed with Taco Bell Diablo sauce. It's exactly what it sounds like, and somehow even better. Simple math, spicy results. Crispy chicken nuggets from Taco Bell. A brand new classic. At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only, while supplies last.
Support for The Middle comes from the stations that air the show and from you. Thanks for making a donation at listentothemiddle.com.
Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, along with our house DJ, Tolliver. And Tolliver, there are certain guests that we have to try really hard to book in advance.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson is not an easy booking, man. And his rider is 1,000,000 miles long. It's great.
His rider. Neither is Andrew Yang, neither is Katie Couric, or our guest this hour, who is one of the world's most recognized and accomplished foreign correspondents, but also someone who is usually not in a time zone that works for our live show. That would be Lyse Doucet, the chief international correspondent for the BBC. And we are so excited to have her with us this hour while she's in North America. And we're going to be talking about her new book about Afghanistan, but also taking your calls on some of the big global issues in the news. So get your questions ready at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, what a show last week when we asked you if you're afraid that AI will take your job. So many great calls during the show. And here are some of the voicemails that came in.
Hi, I'm Austin. I'm a locksmith in Euless, Texas, and I am not worried about AI taking my job. Potentially, it could help in some ways. I think a lot of blue-collar work is probably going to be pretty safe.
Hi, my name is Tuesday, and I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm not worried that AI has replaced my job. It already has, so it's frustrating that I got a creative writing degree, and then ChatGPT came out a year later, and so it has already replaced me in a lot of ways.
This is Daniel from Denver, Colorado. I am currently a maintenance manager. Currently, I am not concerned about losing my job to AI. I've asked some questions about how to troubleshoot some machinery, and a lot of the answers that I get is, have you tried plugging it in? So it's, at this point, not smart enough.
Not smart enough yet. Thanks to everyone who called in. As always, you can hear that whole show by subscribing to The Middle wherever you get your podcasts. And Tolliver, before I bring in our guest, just remind people how they can reach us with their questions.
Yeah, you can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or comment on our live stream on YouTube.
Well, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Lyse Doucet, the BBC's chief international correspondent, to The Middle. Lyse, welcome.
Welcome, Jeremy. I have to say, just listening to that, are we worried that AI is going to take our jobs? Me and you talking to each other?
I think, yes. Journalists are like high on the list here. I think we're in big trouble.
Oh, but they can't have this
heart
to heart. Here we are on the program, The Middle, and we're in the heart of where it's happening across the Canada-U.S. border. Me and you talking together. AI couldn't do that.
And wait till you hear our callers, because it is a lot of fun. But you've got a new book out. It's called The Finest Hotel in Kabul, and I want to start there because Afghanistan, as you know, is America's longest war. You've been reporting from Afghanistan for decades, starting in the 80s, and you write your book through the lens of a luxury hotel in Kabul, which you've stayed in many, many times. What can you learn about the recent history of the country through a hotel?
Good. Thank you very much, Jeremy. It's great to be on your program. We've tried a long time to do this, and it's very kind of you to mention my new book. And I think I have to underline, and I think this is something that both you and I have to deal with, is that people are getting tired of depressing news, glum news, grim news, things going wrong. And in our business, we have something called news avoidance. And I thought people can't avoid the news because those wars far away, those conflicts, including Afghanistan. You mentioned that Afghanistan was America's longest war, recent American history. In fact, it for decades has been threaded through Afghanistan. So I wanted to explore a different kind of storytelling, to use the power of literature, some of the conventions of fiction writing, to write a true story, a non-fiction story. And, we sometimes use this expression, the story of the story. I needed a prism, a conceit, not just to give out just wadges of information about Afghanistan. No one's going to want to read that. I wanted to tell a story of history through the lives of people. And it was this first luxury hotel, the first 5-star international hotel in Kabul, which was built when Afghanistan was a kingdom, and which saw so much of Afghan history, decade after decade, over 50 years, through every possible political system the world has tried, that went through this hotel. History literally lives within its walls. And of course, for me, it was my first Afghan home. I stayed in the hotel for nearly a year to cover what was really the biggest story of that time, the Soviet troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. The hotel became my home, and the people running the hotel became my friends, and they are to this day.
And in that period of time, this was in the 80s that you were there for the first time. What would you say is the golden era of Afghanistan in those last 40 or so years?
Interesting, that word golden. It's how Afghans describe those first years when Afghanistan was still a kingdom. It wasn't perfect by any measure, but it was the time before war. So they look back at that period with great longing, and the hotel was very much a part of that time. Afghanistan was run by a mild-mannered, French-educated king, Zaire Shah, trying to balance Afghanistan's relationship with the West and the East, between the United States and the Soviet Union at a time of a very, very intense Cold War, as we called it. And building this first 5-star hotel was a symbol of his efforts to modernize Afghanistan, to open it up to the world. Of course, then it was a bubble. It was geographically on a pine-covered hill on the edge of the city, above the city's cares. It was an luxurious hotel, which was only for the fortunate in life, or those who had a fortune, the royals, the wealthy tourists, the diplomats, the privileged merchants. But it was a time where there was bikinis by the swimming pool, cocktails on the roof. Even Americans who were there at the time said, "Lyse, I never tasted escargot in the United States or aubergine Thomas Gutierrez, one of the world's leading experts on Afghanistan, lives in Omaha, son of a baker, and he was there as a Peace Corps volunteer and then went on to stay. And he said, Lyse, we never had escargot. I never tasted aubergine in Omaha. It really was. Then for a certain rarefied part of life, it was described as the Paris of Asia.
Well, and today, I mean, you were there. Let's go to 2021, because you were there at this key moment when the U.S. had to withdraw, when the Taliban took over the country. And they evacuated tens of thousands of people from Afghanistan in a very short period of time. But then there was the suicide bombing at the airport. 180 people killed, 13 American troops. President Biden got a lot of criticism for how that withdrawal was handled. President Trump has said it was a humiliation for the United States. How do you see it, that withdrawal?
Everyone has to share the blame for that. President Trump's first administration, which decided that it was time to talk to the Taliban, even though previous governments had said we're not going to talk directly to the Taliban until the Taliban also agree to talk to the Afghan government to move towards, to end the war, move towards a representative government. President Trump had promised that he would bring all the American soldiers home. That obviously went down well in America. When when President Biden took over, he decided to continue with that policy. And President Biden, remember, was someone who had never approved of sending troops to Afghanistan when he was vice president during Obama's time. 4 American presidents, Republican and Democrat, had tried to end this long war, which, as you say, became America's longest war. But Jeremy, what Afghans said at the time and say to this day, look, we knew that it was time for the troops to leave. It had been 20 years. But what we disagreed with was the way that they left. You may remember at that time, there was all this discussion that the United States wanted to avoid a Saigon situation, the disastrous pullout from Vietnam. And you got Saigon multiplied by 100. Those aircrafts taking off from Kabul airport, Afghans clinging to the underbelly of the plane, a rush of panic towards the aircraft. It was a debacle. You can only call it that. So it ended very, very badly, and we see the result today.
Well, and today, after all of that, how important do you think Afghanistan is to the United States? This was, of course, the place where the 9/11 attacks were planned, where bin Laden was.
There was those who follow Afghanistan closely, and I'm sure many of your listeners do, and your viewers. And there's still a lot of pain out there. Pain in America, pain in Canada, where I am, pain mostly about among Afghans and all the other countries who contributed troops, who sent their diplomats, who spent their aid dollars, who lost lives, and only to see the Taliban return again. After the terrible attacks of September 11th in the United States, blamed on the al-Qaeda leader, Osama bin Laden, first of all, it was about finding Osama bin Laden, bringing down the Taliban, and then the goalposts seemed to keep shifting. Was America there just to protect America's security, which is, of course, a very important goal? Was it about protecting the women and girls of Afghanistan? Was it about nation building? And as more and more troops went, more and more aid dollars had more and more ambitions. They call it mission creep, to the point that for the Americans, for the British and others, they said, well, why are we in Afghanistan? We're digging in deeper and deeper and deeper. Yeah. And all the while, the Taliban started coming back.
Stand by. I want to tell our listeners again, you can reach us with your questions about Afghanistan or the U.S. role in the world or other key hotspots for Lyse Doucet at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Tolliver, as we said, Lyse was in Afghanistan for the withdrawal of the troops back in 2021.
Yeah, one of the most dramatic moments. Here she is reporting for the BBC back then. Take a listen.
There is a crush of people desperate to get in to try and get on a flight to anywhere in the world, even though this is such a painful time. So many of the people we met broke down in tears that this has happened all so suddenly, all so shockingly, that they don't want to leave. Their lives are here, but they feel that if they ever had the idea, either for themselves or for their children, to leave, that this is the moment, and that when that window shuts, it may shut forever for them.
What a moment that was. Such an historic moment. We'll be right back with your calls for Lyse Doucet coming up on The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have I asked my HVAC guy I found on Angie.com to change my grandpa's trachea tube? Because I was so amazed by how quickly he replaced our air ducts. I knew I could trust him to change Pop-Pop's tube while I was on vacation.
Make it quick, young man.
Aw, see? Pop-Pop trusts you.
I think we should call a doctor.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we are taking your questions on global issues with the BBC's chief international correspondent, Lyse Doucet. That is such an open-ended thing. You can ask Lyse whatever you want about world news. Tolliver, what is the number again to call in?
It's 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on social media.
And before we get to the phones, Lyse, after all these years, do you still get scared, worried for your safety when you go to these dangerous places?
I think now we understand a lot more about safety and security. And so for not just for the BBC, but for I see colleagues from National Public Radio, broadcasters the world over, media the world over, we prepare for the risks. We think about the risks beforehand. We're all trained in how to work in high-risk environments. So you're already thinking before you go about what the risks are out there, be it Ukraine or in Sudan or in Afghanistan, wherever you go. And then you have to decide what is the risk worth taking and what to do if something terrible happens.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the gifts of being a television and radio broadcaster is that we go in a team. And also, if I'm in Afghanistan, I work with an Afghan. In Syria, I work with a Syrian. In Sudan, I work with someone who's Sudanese. And that gives you an extra level of protection, because no matter how long we spend in a country, we will never know about that country as much as someone from that country. So we build in the layers, and that gives me that level of confidence. And finally, I would say, for many of these places, when I think about going to Kabul or Khartoum or Amman or Jerusalem or many of these places, I've spent so much time in them already that I don't think of it as a story. I think, oh, I'm going to see this person I know. Oh, I'll be able to go back with this place. And that also gives me a level of confidence, because I've been there, and I have a little bit, I've lived through at least a bit of the history as I prepare to go back to a new time of history.
Mm-hmm. Let's get to the phones. Rachel is calling in from Phoenix, Arizona. Rachel, go ahead with your question for Lyse Doucet.
Hi. I just want to know, Lyse, first of all, big fan, but since you've been all over the world and talked to so many different kinds of people, do you believe that the perception of Americans has changed under the current administration?
Great question, Rachel. Lyse.
The perception of America. Well, it depends. It's great to get a call from Arizona. I was at the University of Arizona last year and loved it. Loved the cacti. So thank you very much, and thank you for following the BBC. I think it has, but I don't think it's not black and white. There are parts of the world who see President Donald Trump as a great president. I was in Jerusalem when he came to Jerusalem to sign the deal, which brought about the first the ceasefire in the first phase of what's called his 20-point peace plan. Then he went on to Sharm el-Sheikh. There's great skepticism about whether this will quickly move. It's certainly not peace now, but at least he brought some of the fighting to an end, helped to bring the 20 Israeli hostages home, and the remains of the others are coming. So he was fated there as someone who can finally bring about some of the results that people have been hoping for. But I'm talking to you from Canada, and of course in Canada we are very, very unhappy with a president who has threatened us with annexing the country, has imposed swingeing tariffs, which are having an increasingly negative effect and very worrying effect on the Canadian economy. It has helped Canadians to rally around the flag. So I think there's a mixed picture across the world. And it will all depend not just what President Trump says, but what he does.
A lot of the places in the United States that rely on Canadian tourists have been seeing big drops in people coming in over the last many months for exactly that reason. Let's go to Fury, who is calling in from Dallas, Texas. Fury, go ahead with your question for Lyse Doucet.
I want to ask your guest if she heard this version. Some of the earlier American generals had a statement that Afghanistan was never conquered by the British and Genghis Khan and the Russians, and they were going to conquer it. I don't know if she's ever heard that or not. I have. And the second comment I had from one of my friends at CIA was that the reason we are not going to win this war is with the guy who makes $1 a day and is bent to kill the invaders, and the invaders who cost us $10,000 a day eventually are going to run out of money. So I just want to comment if she's heard of these two comments over her years in Afghanistan.
Okay, Fury, thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for following Afghanistan so closely. Afghans don't want to be conquered. They're not the only people who would say that. Canadians don't want to be conquered either. Americans don't want to be conquered, but Afghans certainly, because of they've been cursed by their geography, being landlocked. In a previous century, the Russians and the British, Imperial Russian people, fighting over Afghanistan to reach, as they say, the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. You mentioned some of the other invaders. They're very proud, a very proud people. And then when you get back to after the U.S.-led invasion of Afghanistan, which toppled the Taliban, I wouldn't put it in the way that was put it with the $1 versus the $10,000. But what I would say is that Afghanistan remains, for all that's been lost, and there's been a lot of loss, that Afghans haven't lost their deeply ingrained sense of hospitality. And had there not been the U.S. air raids and raids on the ground, the special forces raids into Afghan villages, the bombing of villages to try to destroy the Taliban infrastructure, to kill the Taliban, which also killed civilians, destroyed villages, then Afghans would have been more welcoming. They welcomed the Americans and the international community with open arms. Afghans dared to believe this would be the beginning of peace, only to find people being rounded up and sent to Guantanamo Bay. I know that at the time, America was angry. They wanted to find the people that they thought were responsible for the September 11th attacks, but a lot of people who were not responsible did end up in Guantanamo Bay, and a lot of people in their villages lived through violence, which led them to actually turn away from the people that they thought they could have welcomed with open arms. So I think it's more how you behave on the ground. And I should say that the Americans brought a lot of aid. They did bring some development. It wasn't just a one-way street, but there was bad mixed with the good, and that did turn the minds of some Afghans and did contribute to the rise of the Taliban and their return to power.
Well, speaking of welcoming people with open arms, some 200,000 Afghans resettled in the United States after the war, and now the Trump administration has removed the temporary protected status for many of them, so they have to leave again. What do you make of that? Where are they going to go?
Okay, can you imagine being in the shoes of Afghans who finally reach America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, including those who took on the very risky jobs of translating for American troops, were the eyes and ears of the Americans on the ground, who worked for American aid agencies, who feel their lives are threatened by staying in Afghanistan, and some of them took very dangerous journeys to reach the United States. And then finally they arrive on American soil. They breathe a sigh of relief and are now being told that the special status for Afghans, because of this relationship where Americans and Afghans work together, that's being lifted. I mean, it's a desperately, desperately anxious time, a very, very fearful time for so many. Where are they going to go? They don't want to go back to Afghanistan. They don't want to go to a country where they don't feel safe. Many of them have family in the United States, and I don't need to tell you that that's part of a much broader picture of immigration in the United States. And I would emphasize that is a big issue, immigration in the United States. It's a big issue in Britain, where I live. It's even an issue in Canada, where this is an economy built on immigration. But that particular measure is causing not just angst and anger and fear among Afghans, but also among U.S. veterans who work so closely, other groups helping the Afghans.
Reminder to our listeners that we're taking questions on all things, not just Afghanistan, but Tolliver, maybe there's a question that's come in at listentothemiddle.com.
Yeah, there's a few. Well, okay, so a lot of people are asking about what a realistic end to the war in Ukraine looks like. So maybe we can touch on that at some point. And then Joanna Minneapolis specifically says, please talk about the ban on international correspondents in Gaza. How was that allowed to proceed for years?
Yes. Which one would you like to take on first,
Well,
Jeremy?
why don't you start with Gaza briefly, and then I do want to ask you about Ukraine.
Well, after on October the 13th, when President Trump came to the Middle East, to Jerusalem and to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, that marked the start of the first phase of the start of the ceasefire. It's fragile, but it's it's not perfect. There is still Israeli bombing. There's still fighting, but it's much better than it was before. And then there was a suggestion. There was a lot of discussion in Israel that now would be the time to, at long last, allow journalists to go independently into Gaza to see the war, to see the result of this grievous war, the worst that the Middle East has seen for the first time. All that has been allowed so far, one of my colleagues, Lucy Williamson, one of our Middle East correspondents, did go in with the Israeli army, but they're only allowed to go into those areas still controlled by Israel. They're beyond what I'm sure your viewers, listeners have heard, a yellow line. Israel still controls 53% of the Gaza Strip, so they're not allowed to go into the areas where Palestinians are. They're not allowed to talk to Palestinians. So it's a very, very
And that's not just about
limited.
their own safety. Then that's not just about their own safety. That's Israel doesn't want the journalists to be talking to ordinary Palestinians.
Well, I mean, we have to ask as journalists if the Israelis are preventing journalists from going in. They say there are security reasons, but the war has more or less largely stopped. So why not let journalists into Gaza? So the prevailing view is that there must be something to hide. Of course, we have seen what has been the scenes on the ground, the absolutely apocalyptic scenes. It is absolutely astonishing to see how much of Gaza now lies in ruin, how Gazans are forced to huge displacement, some as many as 15 times, living in tents. The infrastructure, the United Nations says up to 90% of the infrastructure of Gaza is destroyed. I mean, I am asking, how could any of us live in those kinds of conditions?
But you're saying the ceasefire is holding for now, but fragile, but very fragile there. What about what would you call it, a stalemate right now with Ukraine, with what's happening in Ukraine?
Yes, it's a war of attrition. It's a grinding war with growing losses on both sides. The Russians are making advances. They are really closing in on a really important juncture called Pokrovsk. I'm sure those who follow closely will have heard that. They've said they've taken Pokrovsk. That is a real junction in terms of symbolically, but also in terms of transportation links, supply lines, and the estimate now is that Russian forces control about 19% of Ukrainian territory. Of course, we have President Trump, who came to power saying, well, in the election campaign, he boasted he could end the war in a day.
End it in a day.
A day. Then he came to power and he said, well, it'll take 100 days. And he goes back and forth. He said, but most recently during the visit of Viktor Orban of Hungary, we want the war to end in the near future. Before that, he said, oh, they still have to keep fighting. They want to keep fighting. It's a terrible war for the Russian soldiers who are dying in huge numbers, for the Ukrainian troops who are exhausted but are still defiant that they're not going to give up their country to Russian occupation, and the people of Ukraine who dazzled, inspired the world when they stood up. I was in Kyiv at that time, to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Unbelievable, we thought, that this would happen in our time. And they fought back, they pushed Russian forces back on the outskirts of Kyiv, in some other places. But now they just haven't been able to match the Russians soldier by soldier, and Russia is now on a war footing. It has a war economy. And the other interesting, Jeremy, about it is that it's this reality of the war on the ground, that some parts of the war are being fought in the trenches, like the First or the Second World War, and the other part of the war is being fought in the skies with these most modern of drones that are causing so much suffering. They're getting into Russian territory as well, but for the lives of Ukrainians, hitting the energy infrastructure, hitting residential areas. It's really, really unimaginable that this should be happening in our time. The rules of war are being shattered on an industrial scale.
And so close to so many places in Europe that so many probably of our listeners visit. And it's just amazing that it's happening right there. Let's sneak in another call before we have to take a quick break. Martha is calling from Oak Park, Illinois. Martha, your question for Lyse Doucet.
Hi, yes. Thanks for taking my call. I was wondering about in Sudan, and I've been reading that it's being described as the worst humanitarian crisis that's ongoing right now. Do you agree with that? But also, what's been the impact of kind of the cutbacks in U.S. aid in that situation, and what might be the solutions without that?
Great question, Martha.
Oh,
Lyse
thank you
Doucet.
so much. And thank you very much for asking about the dismantling of USAID. You know, I've said to people that it was for the rest of the world who had come to appreciate American generosity, had millions the world over, were living with the benefits of American generosity. And when the USAID was dismantled, it didn't seem that this caused, at least in America, too much was happening, and that there wasn't enough protests about it because so much was also happening at that time.
There was a lot going on, yes.
Yeah,
Right.
but it's had a devastating effect, I'm sure, because you sound like someone, and thank you very much for being someone who follows the news closely, that, you know, despite the denials that millions are dying because they don't have access to life-saving drugs, HIV patients, in Afghanistan, it's had a colossal effect that, you know, hospitals have closed down, the hunger is growing, women's education that was being funded through USAID, the secret schools and internet learning, that's also closed down. And yes, in Sudan as well, which it also benefited from. And of course, the world thanks the United States for being so generous. But I suppose that is was seen as part of it. And so one administration after another saw it as part of America's role in the world, being a compass for the world. I'm so glad you asked about Sudan. And I don't know, Jeremy, how often people ask about Sudan on your program. It is the forgotten war. Of course, Gaza, Ukraine, these are major conflicts of our time that draw in so many countries far and wide. But Sudan is an atrocious war in every way. It's another place where it's been very, very hard for journalists to get in. I managed, my last trip was a year ago. I went with the UN, with the first visit of the UN humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, and he said, I'm going to Sudan to make the point that Sudan needs help.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think about you as somebody who might be happy if they had a flight from Khartoum to Kyiv. It would make it easier for you to get back and forth without having to go back to London. Tolliver, yes. Our guest, Lyse Doucet, has also been to Iran, which is very difficult for journalists to visit.
That's right. Listen to this report from the capital city of Tehran just after a tentative ceasefire was reached following a 12-day conflict between Iran and Israel earlier this year.
Day 2 of the ceasefire, and despite its shaky start, it seems to be holding, and traffic is starting to return to the streets of Tehran. The city is starting to look like itself, but so many of the cafes, the shops, the government offices are still shut. So many residents fled this city once Israeli attacks started, and they seem to be waiting until the end of the Iranian weekend, which starts tomorrow, to see whether it truly holds.
Tehran, a city I would love to visit someday.
Yeah, there's a book I love called Persepolis, written about Tehran.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody should check it out. Graphic novel. I've never heard of it, but yeah.
Tolliver's book suggestions
book
coming
club
next.
starts today.
If you haven't signed up, by the way, for the Middle newsletter, please do that at listentothemiddle.com. You get Tolliver's tidbits every week. It's not to be missed. We'll be right back with more of your calls on The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have I asked my electrician I found on Angie.com to bury my pet hamster Nibbles in our yard for me? Because I was so moved by how carefully he buried my electrical wires, I knew I could trust him to bury my sweet Nibbles after his untimely end. Nibbles, gone too soon. May he scurry in peace.
Hey, sorry about your pet, but I just wire stuff.
Nibbles would have loved you like a brother.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of bitch, come round here with my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. In this hour, we're taking your calls about anything happening in the world for the BBC's chief international correspondent, Lyse Doucet. Her new book is called The Finest Hotel in Kabul. You can reach us at 844-4MIDDLE. That is 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. Let's go right back to the phones. And Victor, who is calling from Los Angeles. Victor, go ahead with your question for Lyse Doucet.
Yes, hi. Great discussion, and good to hear how you've traveled the world. One thing that hasn't come up, and it was bothersome to me when the fall of Afghanistan occurred, was the plight of women in that country and the loss of their civil rights. And it's not being talked about a lot. And I'm just wondering how things going. Are things getting better for women to, be able to be free and read and go to school, or are they getting worse? Thank you.
Great question, Victor. Thank you. Lyse Doucet.
Bless you, Victor, for asking about that, because what I hear so often from Afghans, they say, everyone's forgotten us. Nobody cares about us anymore. But I think you would agree with me, Victor, and I'm sure everyone who listens to this program, how can we accept that we live in a world where there's a country which doesn't allow girls to go to school beyond grade 6, doesn't allow women to go to university, bans women from many of the jobs. Women do still work. If you go to Kabul, the women are working at the international airport. They are working in some private companies as long as they're segregated with the men. But, Victor, when the Taliban were engaged in talks with the Americans about the withdrawal of the last American forces, about what the Americans said had to also be a move towards discussion about power sharing in Kabul, or across Afghanistan, Taliban leaders told us, foreign correspondents, but they told Afghan women negotiators that they wouldn't rule the way that they did the first time round. They understood that they couldn't be so harsh, that girls would be educated, women would work, women could hold many positions. But week on week, it becomes even worse. So much so that Afghans say now that it's even worse than it was in the 90s. The Taliban, the top leadership of the Taliban have promulgated edicts, more than 70, most of them having to do with more and more restrictions on the lives of women and girls. But I will say that on my last trip, and I've been trying since then to get a visa 2 years ago, I met a founding member of the Taliban who I've known for many years. And he said to me, 95% of the Taliban, 95% don't agree with the harshest of these edicts. Yes, we're a conservative country. Yes, we're Muslim and we have our traditions and values. But Islam gives girls the right to be educated, women to pursue their potential. To which, of course, when I put that on social media, Afghan said, well, why aren't you doing something about it? But the Taliban value more than anything else their unity. They don't want to splinter. They want to maintain control. And so those Taliban leaders who've spoken out, some of them have had to leave because they've called so publicly for girls to be educated. And the way it was described to me recently by an Afghan friend who keeps a very close eye, he said that it's like this big pressure is building up against this wall of this ultra-conservative leaders who are promulgating these edicts. The wall is very thick and there's little cracks, but there's not enough of a push, and will have to come from within Afghanistan, within the Taliban, to crack this open so that the Taliban, Afghanistan, can return to the international community.
Well, and certainly there are many Muslim countries where women have a lot more rights than they do in Afghanistan. I think of Turkey, even Saudi Arabia has been expanding the rights of women recently. The lines are all full, Lyse, so we're going to try to get through as many as we can here. Karen is calling from Boise, Idaho. Karen, go ahead with your question.
Hello. This is a great honor. First of all, congrats on all that you're doing with the Middle. It's going great. It's really picked up very well. I never thought I would call, but Lyse has motivated me. I'm a huge fan of Lyse's work. She's my number one favorite correspondent. I love your Saturday afternoon anchoring shows. I wait for them. You. I'm a Pakistani American. I came here to study at Dartmouth and then Columbia, and then for various reasons ended out in Boise, Idaho, which I love, by the way. I love the Mountain West. And with Canadian roots, so all my family's in Canada. So my question is about So my question is about the recent events in, the bombing in Delhi, followed by the day after the bombing in Islamabad. Pakistan's blaming Afghanistan. The Indians are blaming Pakistan. There was a recent small war between Pakistan and India. Tensions have been picking up between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I'm just sort of wondering, what do you think about, what's going on and what the future is there?
Thank you, Karen.
Wow, Karen, that's a really good question. In fact, Jeremy and I were talking about it at the beginning about, I said, I better check. There's just been some news because that is really important. And thank you for bringing it up, that now the Pakistan Interior Minister is blaming Afghanistan for the 2 suicide bombings in Islamabad. And of course, that has come, you would know, I'm sure you have friends in Pakistan, a huge shock to Pakistan. And many in Pakistan, Afghanistan, India are wondering what comes next. But this is really worrying. They had talks in Istanbul between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Both sides have blamed each other. As you know, Pakistan accuses Afghanistan, the Taliban, of giving refuge to the Tehrik-i Taliban, the TTP, which has been locked in war, as you know, with the government in Islamabad and the armed forces for a very long time. The Afghans deny that. And no side is backing down. Both sides are saying they have a right to attack their neighbor, India. And then there's that age-old rivalry between India and Pakistan, that India and Pakistan always see a shadow of their other war, whatever happens in Afghanistan. It is a very, very dangerous moment. And it could escalate if wiser, cooler heads don't prevail. But so far, the heads aren't cooling.
Jude is calling in from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Jude, a beautiful place. Go ahead with your question for Lyse Doucet.
Yes, hello. Thanks so much for taking my call. Yes, my question is about the recent BBC scandal involving the Donald Trump speech. And if you think that this just plays into the narrative of when Trump talked about the fake news media, the fact that BBC spliced his speech up to say something that he didn't really say.
Can I say, first of all, and not to avoid, I'm going to answer the question, but I was going to say to Jeremy, I hope there's a caller from Louisiana, because my ancestry is Cajun. I'm an Acadian from Canada.
Oh, great.
And if you go, and I'm sure in Baton Rouge and in Lafayette, there's Doucet buildings, Doucet houses. The Doucet family is one of the original Acadian families. And when the British expelled the Acadians in 1755, we went down to the 13 colonies and to Louisiana. That's why Cajun music, Cajun cooking. So I was hoping my cousins from Louisiana would call today. And I got Baton Rouge, yay, très bien. Soyez le bienvenu. But anyway, your question about the BBC. This is a very painful time for the BBC. I'm not an editor, so I'm not in the managing board, but I'm a senior correspondent for the BBC. What has been said tonight is that the BBC has apologized and said we made an error. There was an editing error. It should not have happened, where they took one part of President Trump's speech from the beginning of the speech and one part from the end of the speech. And instead of putting something in it, we talk about a flash or something, or indicating that these were happening at a different time, but by putting them together, they created a different impact. Now, of course, the BBC is not the only one to have reported on President Trump's January 6th speech.
Right.
He's accused by some people of having triggered the kind, or at least caused an atmosphere. President Trump, of course, calls it a perfect speech. He's now threatening to sue. In fact, he started legal action against the BBC. So suffice it to say that BBC says, okay, an error was made. We accept that an error was made. Many are saying you should have dealt with that earlier. They took their time. Now they've apologized to President Trump. Now it's in the legal field. And those of us in the BBC who are reporters are just saying, look, but let's use this opportunity as a way to strengthen the BBC, to strengthen broadcaster. Here we are speaking on this great program, which is part of the public, of informing the public across the United States. We need public broadcasting. We need independent broadcasting. It's a fundamental pillar of democracy. If independent broadcasting takes a hit, so too does our democratic society. And many believe in Britain that there is still a place for public broadcasting, and the BBC is still trusted. But we are now having a lot of introspection at the BBC, and there's a long tail. As with almost every media organization the world over, we're accused of pro-Palestinian bias and also pro-Israeli bias. And so there have been some really challenging moments, and mistakes have been made by the BBC. Yeah. Only God is perfect, as we say. And because the BBC is public and belongs to the public, we come under far more scrutiny, far more pressure than any other media organization in Britain. It should be that, because we belong to the people of Britain who pay for it. But there's a huge conversation going on in Britain right now about the future of the BBC, of public broadcasting, and that is a good thing.
Well, and it's interesting that this is about the editing of a speech, because if you go onto social media right now, nobody would have any qualms about making a cut or even putting in an artificial intelligence created, speech of Donald Trump. But in the traditional media organizations like the BBC, like NPR, like others, there are standards that have to be adhered to, and people expect that of them. Chris is calling in from Fort Worth, Texas. Hi, Chris. We were just there last week, but go ahead with your question.
Other guys, big fan of both of you guys. I was calling to see if you feel like there are any stories or current events that are currently happening that maybe aren't getting enough airtime that you think that they deserve.
Great question, Chris. Thank you.
Oh, wow. That's really good. You got a good audience, Jerry. I like this program. I might stay up in the middle of the night in Britain, 2 a.m. to 3 a.m.
Great. We'd love to have you
and
back.
And the music is off the charts. Wow.
Yeah.
It would keep me awake. You go, guys. I mentioned earlier about Sudan, but Sudan is getting a bit more. We don't talk about the Rohingyas from Myanmar, who are languishing and suffering in camps in India and Bangladesh. We don't talk. There's lots of places that South Sudan doesn't get enough. There's so many places that don't get. I mean, the world doesn't. There's a lot of news, and of course, domestic news and local news, and President Trump brings a lot of news. So I'm just trying to think whether I could think. I think Sudan definitely deserves more. Afghanistan definitely deserves more. Partly it's a problem. Again, we're back to what Jeremy and I, we talked about earlier, that it's hard for journalists to get into Sudan. It's hard for journalists to get into Afghanistan as well. And even though the journalists on the ground, particularly in Gaza, have done a job which can only be described as heroic, but it also helps to strengthen local journalists. When international journalists come in, they provide resources, they provide some security, and they shine a bigger light on what is happening in many of these countries. We work together.
Gregory is calling in from Chicago. Hi, Gregory. Go ahead with your question.
Good evening, Madam Doucet. I had the opportunity to see former Polish President Lech Walesa on his international speaking tour speak here in Chicago on October 4th.
Oh, wow.
And
it brings us right back in history, isn't it? What a head-spinning time that was.
It was, and I attended the European Nuclear Disarmament Conference in March of 1983, which subsequently led to Gorbachev and Reagan bringing down the Iron Wall and ending the Cold War, and the understanding was NATO would not expand 1 inch east of East Germany, and Lech Walesa put out a clarion call, which I think was his main message, because this is his only international speaking tour. He's up in age, 81, and a wonderful man, and it was great to everyone greeted him afterwards, and I'll never forget that. And he said that we're moving from the age, we moved from the age of empires and kings to nation states the last 500 years, but we really need to go to continental and then ultimately global management. And the European Union, with 28 countries that used to fight each other for centuries, is the example of that. But he still vilified Russia as being, a gangster economy, and they've never known democracy. And so I just wanted to see if you could say something, at least from the Russian perspective, about NATO expansion as at least part of the understanding of why they went in to get that buffer from Euro's nuclear missiles in the future, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregory.
Thank you very much for bringing us back. It's, some of us like to take refuge in history, but those were absolutely, those were defining times which changed the shape of the world, changed the shape of superpower politics. And they're back to that moment where we dared to believe. You had Francis Fukuyama talking about the end of history, that the age-old rivalry, that dangerous rivalry between the Soviet Empire and the American Empire would end for the good of all peoples, and there was a very ecstatic moment. And now, of course, we live in a very different age. There's been a lot of discussion about what was actually said in that speech and whether there was a promise not to move, as you put it, into 1 inch. President Putin talks about it endlessly, that promises were broken, that he felt threatened by it. Others would say, including countries like Finland and Sweden, who recently joined the NATO military alliance, even though for decades they had remained neutral, is that it doesn't really have, that the countries of the former Soviet Union were not pushed by NATO or pulled by NATO into its embrace. They wanted to join NATO. They wanted to become part of the international community. This was not forced conscription to join the world's biggest military alliance. These countries were embracing their new democracy. They were out from under the Soviet yoke, and they chose to look west and not east. I have to say, I was in Kyiv during those days of huge foreboding when President Putin did his history lesson talking about how Ukraine was a mistake. The Bolsheviks made a mistake in giving parts of Ukraine, parts of Russia away, that it was a fiction, that Ukraine belonged in Russia. And he keeps saying that. He keeps presenting the maps to President Trump that Ukraine doesn't have a right to exist. And being in Ukraine at that time, I have to say that Ukrainians being told that they did not have a right to exist made Ukrainians even more Ukrainian. And I don't think you can. President Putin doesn't have the right in our day and age, although it's, we had President Trump wanting to take parts of Greenland, wanting to take parts of Canada, wanting to take parts of the
Hasn't
Panama
talked about that in a while. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, they sort of stopped on that one. I know I'm going to regret this, Tolliver, but I'm going to go to one more quick call because it's a fun one. Helena, you got to be very fast in Houston, Texas. Helena, go ahead for Lyse Doucet.
Okay, very quickly. One, I guess if I'm the last caller, let's end it on a lighthearted note. Have you heard the news about the Norwegian princess and the shaman marrying? I wanted an update on that. And two, if there's any other lighthearted news that we could maybe take a deep breath on and end the night with.
lighthearted news.
Norwegian princess. Have I missed the what was the
I missed that too. So yeah.
I think there was something about
married an American shaman.
Oh yes, I know about that one. Yeah. Not that I'm being trivial. I know about that one, and I know about Justin Trudeau is dating Katy Perry, and I know the Blue Jays lost to the Dodgers, but we fought a really good. So those are the kind of stories.
Yeah.
So in Toronto, I was on Blue Jays Way, and I said, yes, we'll go Blue Jays win. So we do. We all need lightness in our life.
We do. Well, thank you for ending us on that note. BBC Chief International Correspondent Lyse Doucet, her new book is called The Finest Hotel in Kabul. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great having you here.
I've loved being on. Thank you.
And next week, we'll be right back here with the host of the Last Invention podcast, which explores some of the biggest concerns about the future of AI. We want to know if you are excited by AI or if you fear that it will destroy us all, Tolliver.
Head over to listentothemiddle.com to join the conversation and subscribe to The Middle wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss a single episode.
The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Annika Dessler, and Brandon Condritz. Our technical director this week, Jason Croft. Thanks to our satellite radio listeners, our podcast audience, and the hundreds of public radio stations making it possible for people across the country to listen to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you next week.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather. In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to everybody.
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'm going back to my hometown to uncover the truth. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
14 years in prison for killing a young woman. A 15-year sentence for a crash that caused 3 deaths. 12 and a half years for killing a child and critically injuring her mother. All true stories, all caused by marijuana-impaired drivers. No matter what you tell yourself, if you feel different, you drive different. So, if you're high, just don't drive. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.